Peace, dear family. I hope all is well. So, I wanted to talk about our journeys. As you know, a lot of us have been through a lot. And my journey is, in fact, a unique one. One of the things that I always teach, and it may be religious, it may not be, it may be spiritual, may not be. But one of the things that you're going to always have to do is be on your side. In other words, there's a reason why you're here. Now, a lot of us get stuck. And people call me all the time, talk to me all the time. I coach, I counsel. And usually when we get to a place of being stuck, we rely on what we learn. What I'm trying to point out to you is don't rely on everything that you learn. There are some things you're going to have to unlearn. And as you unlearn them, that is the key way that you get to the next level. Now, what happens when we get stuck? Usually we get stuck, we fall into a crisis. You know how many people contemplate suicide because they feel that life has no meaning? And they get to a point where money can't save them? Just because you have money doesn't mean that your life has meaning. Or they get to the point, they have all of these accolades. They got scholarships. They have streets named after them. They have citations, awards, and they still don't have the will to move on. Now, a lot of times this happens with religion. Most of us, we grow up in a home and we accept the religion of, our mothers and fathers. And then we try that out for a while. And what we find is that we get to a point in life that maybe what mom and dad taught me does not suffice for the rest of my life. Let's talk about the journey that I experienced a little bit just to give it some meaning. Now, I grew up mother and father from a Christian household. And my mother and father were a little bit different in their religious expression. My mother, she's coming from a religious background. She joined what is called the Pentecostal church. My father was kind of experimenting with religion. He took us to Kingdom Hall. We tried that. And then he found out in sending us to private school that he can go to the Catholic church, throw some money in at a parishioner's rate, and our Catholic school tuition would be a little bit lower. So he was wise in that he took us to Catholic church. It was over in 45 minutes, and he was able to pay less for our Catholic school. So here I was. I got some teaching from Catholicism. I got some teaching from Christianity from my mother's side. I also got some from the Jehovah's Witness side. And what I'm trying to say is the good thing about that is this. A lot of our children get stuck later because they only know one thing. They're never exposed to different, types of knowledge. That's why I tell people that if you want your children to be successful, expose them in a safe way. Now, there's a movie by the name of The Hate That You Give. And in this movie, a young sister goes to a school outside of the Black community, even though she lives in the hood. And as she goes to the school in the white community, outside of where she lives, she's exposed to some things. One, she's exposed to not blatant, but she's exposed to racism, being one of the few Black people. And she noticed that some of the Black people conformed to that white community, but she was taught by her father, who was a Black panther. And the father gave them a talk. There are two talks he gave them. One was about the birds and the bees. Let me stop there for a minute. When I was younger, parents didn't talk to a lot of them, maybe yours did, about sex. So we learned from that old dirty magazine, or we learned from hip hop, or we learned from some older kid on the block who told us about what sex was. So a lot of parents didn't expose their children to the knowledge of sexuality. They hid that from them. But in so doing, you didn't expose them with a critical eye. So when they meet up on somebody who exposes them to one way of sexuality, they don't fall for it. But if you expose them and school them, when they meet up with different experiences, they have the knowledge behind it to make a decision. Same thing with food. You expose people to different kinds of foods, then they find out what kind of foods they like and that can benefit them. So they don't get wild the first time they see a bunch of food in front of them. They understand that this over here, I've tried this. This is good for me. This is bad for me. I understand variety. Same thing with religious thought. My daughter, I grew up Christian, but I crossed over into Islam. And I raised my daughter in Islam. However, at a point of even me practicing Islam, it came to a point that I knew that I was not growing. Now, I'm not saying this is the same for all Muslims. What I'm saying is that a lot of us don't make decisions that are internal. There's a point that you get stuck. And you can ask other people. You can ask your spiritual teacher. You can ask your mother. You can ask your father. But at the end of the day, you have to expose yourself to other people's knowledge. The problem is you have to make a decision from within how you're going to live your life. This is where a lot of us get stuck. We end up living somebody else's life instead of our own. And we wonder why we don't feel liberated. We don't feel free. I'm at the point now that all my decisions are decisions that Kevin Muhammad wants to live. And if I make a mistake, I take responsibility. If I make success, it's because I have decided what I need to do. So at a point, I exposed my daughter to some other schools of thought, and it caused her to grow. This is not wrong. A lot of us think that if we read a book outside the Bible, we're going to die. If we read a book outside the Quran, we're going to die. If we read a book about vegetarianism or a certain kind of book on a different way to eat, it's blasphemy, because that's not how my mother and father taught me. And that's why you're stuck. Because most of the time we get stuck because the decisions we make are what other people want us to do and not what we want to do. The other day, my wife and I went out, and we went out to a restaurant. And the restaurant that we went out in was a plant-based restaurant. And the plant-based restaurant, of course, has nothing but plant-based food. So the waitress comes over and she asked me, at what point did you decide that you wanted to change your diet? And I told the waitress, I said, the point that I wanted to change my diet, no one really told me to do that. After I would take these fasts, and after I took these fasts, what happened was I would feel some kind of way. And I would feel good, and then I would start eating dairy, which was my favorite, and I couldn't digest the dairy. I didn't tell her all of that, I told her some of that. But I said after a fast and during my meditation, I decided for me that I was going to change my diet. Over the last year with COVID, I saw a lot of people losing their lives. And I decided that I was going to take better care of my health. So I started working out. And I said, damn, I'm working out, but I'm sore. I'm working out, but I'm not gaining any muscle. Let me study. What's going to have me be able to work out, eat a plant-based diet, and not feel so weak and so sore? So out of my knowledge, I went to YouTube and I went to different sources and learned how to recomposition my body. Now listen, I got a degree in biology. I never heard of recompositioning the body. I never heard of changing the structure of your body, the molecular structure based on what you eat. So I looked and it said, wow, if you're going to build muscle and lose fat, you have to have a certain amount of carbs, percentage, and you got to count them. If you want to build muscle, you have to have a certain amount of protein and count them. And then you have to have a certain amount of fat. And then these are the exercises you have to do to build your shoulders, to build your chest. All of this was an education for me. And it was all a decision that I made from within. Nobody told me. From the time COVID quarantine started, I started with just push-ups, dips, sit-ups, and that was it. Then when the gyms opened again, I started to do some weight training. And then I started to do pullovers, pull-ups, sit-ups, dips in the morning, and then weight training in the evening. I kid you not. My body began to transform almost for the first time in my life. Nobody guided me to make those decisions but me. So what am I saying to you? A lot of us are afraid to trust ourselves. I'm also a business owner. Now, as a business owner, I was kind of thrown into business because I had to either change my career or utilize the knowledge from my career, but outside of a traditional school.